Recording.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, so
Us again.
first Fight Club intro.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's great film in respect of it covers so many different things. There's so many things that you can kind of write about.
Yeah.
Within obviously the restraints of those kind of critical approaches that you kind of look at.
Yeah.
I always think it's quite a tricky one in terms of genre to pin down straight away.
Yeah.
Not the most straightforward in
No,
terms
not
of
at all.
how that kind of
Not
works.
at all.
Maybe we'll come back to that and
Yeah.
sort of like, digress a bit later on. But in terms of as a work from Fincher, I think it's one of my favourite Fincher films because it deals with sort of real contemporary sociological, cultural issues, doesn't it? Which kind of leans towards perhaps him being more of an auteur than maybe other mainstream Hollywood directors.
Because it's got more meaning, you mean? Or?
Maybe, and I think that he tackles maybe sometimes topics that others don't dare to tackle. And there's that sense of irony within the film, isn't there? So I mean, it opens in fact with that, doesn't it? It's very dark and the whole sort of gun in the mouth and all of that kind of stuff, which then goes obviously cyclical, and at the end of the film, that's where we finish up.
Yeah.
It's clever in as much that it covers so many things, and yet there's in terms of the casting, it's very narrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you're captivated by those three characters, aren't you, really?
Definitely, yeah.
So, I think we were saying, interestingly, like there's a lot of really good sort of cinematography within the text, looking at those micro elements, and when he's explaining about his job.
Yeah.
You've got all that whole thing about consumerism that comes in, don't you, with the stellosphere, and all that, and the
So should we maybe give an overview of kind of the themes and the things that are in there?
Yeah.
Because I think you are a little bit ahead of us at this point, because we haven't looked too specifically at cinematography and stuff, because I think everybody's just trying to get their heads around the film.
Same in that respect. We are looking more at the critical approach, but trying to sort of apply.
Bring the
but it's
examples
tricky.
in.
It is tricky.
So the kind of themes that we've been picking out are things like the consumerism, the masculinity in crisis, and other things that possibly come out of that are things such as homoeroticism, fascism possibly with the Fight Club itself, and
anarchism within that as well.
And what else is loads of stuff.
Yeah, there is obviously the auteur nature, which we haven't arrived at yet. But, but the five we sort of concentrate on is gender. Obviously, you mentioned masculinity there. Genre, auteur, social, cultural, political, which includes all the consumerism, politics stuff, and then the fifth one, which can sort of be interchanged. It can either be reviews, can't it? But that's quite a big lump to put aside, or you're sort of focusing on. Again, more, I suppose, sort of like politically orientated cultural elements.
Yes.
So within that five, should we do gender? Because I think we both covered gender so far, haven't we?
Yeah.
I think should we talk about? I suppose the notion of the idea, isn't it, of Fight Club? I mean, the narrator, sort of Jack's so-called character, is interesting. It's that whole thing where you get the sense that he feels he has a loss of, or never perhaps had, manliness, inverted commas. Masculinity is missing from his life.
He's very much projected in that way, isn't it? We've just been looking at examples of him, of how he's not even, we've kind of discussed that he's not even feminised, he's just really neutral.
Yes.
In that, we've talked about metrosexuality as well in there, because that was the time of that, and he's not even that. He's not even like well groomed. He's just very, very neutral. Yeah. And it is that idea of him just fading into the background, being another member of society that isn't noticed, and that idea of the crisis of masculinity at that time.
Definitely, and I think that's it, isn't it? That again, it's almost a social commentary, almost like an ethnography from Fincher, saying that's what men of a certain age in the 90s were like. It's that Generation X of. Not really having a purpose, they even quote it, don't they? And I won't do this verbatim word for word, but that whole thing about we've had no great war to fight, we've had no financial crash to deal with. We they're the middle men of history, the middle generation that you know,
with absent fathers.
We've
just done that quote today, so it's quite an interesting one because it says at the end, it says, but we're very pissed off.
Yeah.
And we had a debate about it, and it's like, what have you got to be pissed off?
Yeah. I know.
Maybe, you shouldn't need a war, etc. But it's not really the point, is it? The point is that we still feel marginalised in society, isn't it? And we feel that, the fatherless figures, that forgotten generation, that's what they feel, isn't it? So even without some catastrophic kind of event, that they still feel that something is wrong.
Well, that's right. I think the thing is, isn't it, like historically, looking at history books and stuff, like what of the men of Generation X era, what function have they actually had? It's because it's on so many levels, isn't it? It's like, I agree with you. I mean, the catastrophe of, I can't even say it, of war is just kind of extreme, but people, I suppose, we talk about masculinity in that respect, it's like there are generations that have said and can honestly say, I did that and I fought for, my family, my country, whatever.
Part of this.
Connection, isn't it? It's a connection. And men don't have that. Men also of that generation, arguably, because the way things are changing, whether this is true or whether it was not, felt more threatened by women in the workplace. Those so-called traditional stereotypical masculine jobs, whatever they were, such as things like heavy industry, have diminished and disappeared.
But it was also part of, the Wall Street crash in the late 80s. It was brought about that time of uncertainty and that time of questioning the big authorities and the big kind of powerful organisations. It kind of similar to history repeating itself in the more recent times. But then that brings into doubt, I think that's evident in the film as well, isn't it? It brings into doubt, first of all, their role in society, but also then that idea of that you should question the bigger organisations that they then go and try and blow up. So that I think there's a number of things in play that lead to, and it's young white men, isn't it? That's the ones that we're focusing on that are struggling to deal with not knowing what their identity is.
It's identity crisis,
that those roles have come confused. And there are certain bits where that's, as much as like Tyler character is, he's very, the anarchy in it all, it's like he's harking back to that more traditional time of where, you had a mother and a father and things were simpler. Because of the way, the way that they speak about women is so misogynistic, and that it's their fault in another kind of sense. And yet is fighting all the things in society that exist, but thinks that might be the answer.
Yeah. And I think that's where Marla's character is really clever, isn't it? Because I think she's used often as a metaphor for, going to those groups and stuff, but she's used as that metaphor for almost filling the void. And I say all this in inverted commas, so it's not meant for offence, but she almost fills the void, of men and what men have done in the past, and he's quite angry with that, and it almost reflects perhaps men's feeling towards women, i.e. not only things like job role but also socially, and we were talking about this sort of it's given a glorified name, isn't it, in many respects, but this whole idea of third wave feminism, the kind of the Sarah Coxes in the 90s and things like that. Who would, they coined them, which is an awful name, I think, the ladette kind of culture, didn't they? And that whole thing that women were doing exactly the same as men, they were, down in pints, even, do you know what I mean, even on a base level, down in pints and going to gigs and not caring and not just doing like men had done.
And it came the other way with men too, because that was the era, and like I say to my class now, like, you're used to seeing male products. That was a new thing. That was massive. Male grooming. It just really became its own kind of market in the 90s. It wasn't, it weren't as, it became pretty much. Not as much. It's never probably going to be as much in terms of female products, but it became very much a much more marketable kind of product that, and that increased certain anxieties. It was things like Viagra was like massively increasing.
All that kind of stuff.
All those kind of things.
Yeah, and it became accepted Beckham wearing that sarong. All that stuff that.
And metrosexuality.
Like you say, metrosexuality at the very beginning. And so it's different because I think what it did is it sort of created a displacement, perhaps. That's the theorised kind of version anyway. I don't know if it actually did. But it certainly, the theories have written about that as if it did. And we don't know to what extent and all the rest of it, but there's definitely that kind of shift, and maybe an inferiority complex about men, about what now was their function and what were they supposed to do. You know, women didn't need men, you know, for child rearing. They didn't need men, you know, for employment because they were quite capable of getting their own directorships in jobs or whatever, you know, and being successful on their own. They didn't need them. Whereas traditionally, the history books tell us that, you know, men were the breadwinners and they were doing this. And so at all levels, I think that's where
that's where we come into the film, really, isn't it? And into Jack as a character.
Yeah.
So Tyler is his alter ego. Because we were talking today about how, like, Tyler physically is quite metrosexual.
Yeah.
You know, even though he's the anarchist and he's the one saying you don't need all this stuff and everything else, he you know, in terms of his hair, it's styled, his body, all the rest of it, he's quite metrosexual in it, and masculine. So, you know, but he is the alter ego. So that is, even though Jack does progress that way and wants to, you know, throw off the shackles, I guess, of the society he's in, clearly in his head, he still wants to look like that. So it's that kind of society, what you look like. And there's that bit on the bus, isn't there, when they're looking at the Calvin Klein. The advert.
Yeah.
What does he say again?
He says, is that what a real man's supposed to look like nowadays, something of that nature, isn't it? And they sort of laugh about it, don't they?
Yeah.
So, you know, there is that. But then again, like you say, you know, the whole sort of body shape and image as well. You know, the fact that they're kind of bare-chested and they're fighting and all of that, like, comes back to what you were saying about sort of homoeroticism, but also about how the body shape is and how it looks. And no surprise, perhaps, and a bit tongue-in-cheek why Brad Pitt's used. You know, because at that time he was at the height of his fame, wasn't he, really?
Yeah.
And he was very much famed as kind of like the Hollywood pin-up as well, and I think quite clever that Fincher used him in that way. And there is, sorry.
Go on.
Oh, I was just going to say that also there's Jared Leto in there as well, isn't there? And there's that lovely line where he says, "Oh, you know, we're told that, you know, we're going to grow up to be movie stars and rock stars." And when he says rock stars, he looks across at Jared Leto, and it's just that connection of very much sort of tongue in cheek. There's lots of sort of comedy in jokes within the text.
Yeah, definitely.
Relating to sexuality, looks, and everything else, which is clever.
Yeah. We talked about another scene where, you know, Tyler's role in that, and in terms of it becoming cult-like, or, you know, the organisation of the Fight Club, that obviously he's the centre of that, and how, like a religion, he becomes this mythical character, so that by the end they are saying, oh, and somebody said he has, whatever they say at the end, I can't remember what it is, like 2 heads or something ridiculous, but just it's ridiculous, so that you realise how these things snowball, don't they? And you know, that the Fight Club itself becomes something, an organisation where people are being controlled, and, you know, brainwashed into doing things that, you know, ultimately they become terrorists, don't they? And that he leads that in terms of, he becomes a mythical kind of character, but it's also when he delivers that kind of speech in, you know, in the Fight Club. And even the way he delivers it is like sermon-like. It's like a priest is saying this. And obviously they're all, you know, his presence and everything is the opposite of what Jack is, isn't it? And it is the binary opposite of that. You know, everyone aspires to be him, don't they?
Yes.
And that's what the Fight Club is set up to be like.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think that, you know, that is clever, isn't it? How that's kind of done in that respect, because you know, you do assume that maybe it's kind of, you know, you pick up that film, you look at that cover, and you know, I remember looking at reviews early on when it was first released, and people saying, who wants to watch a film about men fighting? And it's like, it just so isn't really about that. It's there are some instances though they have actual fights, but so deep, isn't it?
And that the function of the Fight Club is for them to release their emotions. It still goes back to that you know, what's masculine, let's have a fight. But it is also, it's that release of the emotion. That's why he was going to therapy groups, is because it's the only time he can feel anything, really. Like, he's so isolated before that. We don't see him with any friends or anything.
No, completely
and there's something wrong in his life because he can't sleep. And it's, you know, I guess the point is that it's the need to feel something, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fighting is that.
And Tyler says that, doesn't he, in their very first fight after they've gone for a beer. He says, like, you know, I don't want to die without any scars. It, like you say, it's that whole thing about what are the tick boxes of being a man then? You know what I mean? It's like, do you know, you've got to have scars, you've got to have this, you know, it's like, it's kind of nonsense, but it's a social construct that's happened over time, which men perhaps felt they needed to have achieved.
Go back to.
And go back to.
Yeah, and it's that traditional idea again about the physical strength, isn't it? That's part of that traditional idea of what a man is.
Yeah, definitely. And that's and that works on so many sort of different levels, doesn't it? I mean, there's even that bit, isn't there? Embarrassing, isn't it, in a way? But there's even that bit where she's in her apartment, she's going to commit suicide and all the rest of it, and he comes in and he knocks the wardrobe, and obviously she's got that phallus on the side, and she said, "Oh, don't worry, don't feel threatened." And it's it's all those sort of like comedic elements and bits and pieces, but it's those things when you add them up, you can understand maybe how masculinity has been chipped away at.
They're not needed for sex.
And men are not needed for sex, or for their strength, or for their brains, if they ever had any, or whatever. But it's all of that, isn't it? And I suppose that's the social commentary Fincher gets across. I think does it brilliantly.
And he, the phallic imagery is there from the start with the gun in the mouth, and it just continues, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It's in your face.
Yeah.
Literally. So it is that fear of there's a fear of castration, because I think he talks at one point about like how you'll end up with it being thrown off at the motorway or something. Which was a true story.
Oh really?
Yeah, it was a woman whose husband was cheating on her.
Oh, was it the Bobbitts? Was her name Elaine Bobbitt?
I don't know her name, but I remember reading about it or seeing it on the news.
Yeah, I remember it. No, it rings. That is her. I'm sure it was. Yeah.
So it's of that time.
Yes. Yeah. Because you had to have it regrafted. So too much information for camera, but but it was a true story, you're right. But there is that literal kind of sense, isn't there?
Yeah.
And obviously that's displayed, with Bob as well.
Yes.
With the testicular cancer element, and the fact that, again, it's such dark comedy, isn't it? That because Marla turns up to that group, doesn't she, smoking, and says, "Oh, this is testicular cancer, right?" And sort of blows out smoke, and you just think, it's that, oh my gosh, how can she have the gall to kind of even, turn up at this group? And it's cleverly done, but definitely sort of used in metaphor, I think.
Yeah.
I think her character is absolutely awesome, and I think she goes above and beyond, the kind of representation of women per se, but the one-liner she comes out with, the things that she reacts, the way that she reacts is very clever.
I thought it was quite interesting because some of my female students said, I really like her because she, her appearance, she's quite scruffy and obviously is not conforming in that sense, and that she is a bit, she's very flawed.
Which isn't a damning indictment, it's good, but nevertheless, no, I agree with you. I think
she is flawed, and that she is kind of like, she doesn't care.
Yeah.
And that in itself was quite refreshing to see. I think there has been, I read something about that she's very film noir, that she is that femme fatale, that she is, isn't she? Is controlling the men, and that bit, I think it goes into slow motion where she is smoking and she's got sunglasses
close
on.
Up. Just her face.
And it feels very film noir.
Yeah, she's got a hat on, isn't she, as well?
Yeah.
And
it's quite a classic shot from the film.
Yeah, very strong lipstick, if I remember right. Yeah. And really, like I say, it's very much film noir, definitely. So neo-noir, post-noir feel to it.
And Jack definitely feels that she is like femme fatale, that he is attracted to her, but finds her, dangerous.
I agree. I think it's two levels. I think he's attracted by her strength, but also frightened by her strength. And I think that's also an evident feeling of 90s kind of, gender and that whole sort of interaction between men and women. I think there was a period where men did feel perhaps sort of threatened in that position, but at the same time attracted by strong female presence. And again, previously you might argue that hadn't really happened because the 50s through to the 80s period was a strange period for women as well as men, because talking about equality and fighting for rights, etc. Still, socially, politically they might have already happened, but socially they were still changing. And so I think the history books were kind of telling you one thing about gender difference, but the reality was very different, thank God. That it was very much more an equal thing. But I do love that line where she says, she calls him, she says, it's like living with Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Jackass or something like that. and that whole sort of scenario where, she just tells it as it is.
We talked about the last scene as well, and it was up for debate in terms of the narrative structure is that at the end, is it that the suggestion that you do need heterosexual couple, and that is what will bring them the happy ending. That for something that is such a, the film turns everything on its head, that does it return to this idea that a heterosexual couple is the equilibrium kind of thing, that it's them two, you know, I think they're holding hands.
Yeah, they do hold hands. You almost expect to have like a silhouette heart, don't you, like surrounding them. It's, but strangely ironic, the fact that they're kind of seeing these buildings collapsing because they bombed them. And they're holding hands, looking out the same direction, and just odd, isn't it? But nice at the same time.
It kind of is.
It's
you
kind
want
of
them to get together.
It's like, oh, it's lovely, you know. You sort of think, but why? Why do I think it's lovely? It's very strange. It's created a terror act, you know. But but yeah, it's very clever. Again, it's about the things, I think. It raises those issues, doesn't it, about things like, you know, if there's no credit card companies, all the debt returns to zero. All those kind of things about tackling, you know, the developing world and kind of so-called kind of European and Western sort of democracies, and sort of tackling their issues that they found themselves in, which compared to developing world is insignificant, but nevertheless there were very real kind of issues and threats.
And that, you know, it's the same as we were saying today, it's the same as any other terrorist organisation. The usual reason that they start up is from wrongs done to them, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
So they, you know, they feel a cause, and quite often rightly so. But they just end up as bad as possibly as bad as the big corporations that they're trying to to overcome.
Definitely.
So I think we do need to kind of, in terms of gender identity, homoeroticism is something that I'm not sure how many people. There was quite a few that spotted it before, but some people were like, what? And in terms of, you know, that bathroom scene where there's that, you know, Jack and Tyler.
Yeah, he's in the bath.
It's so intimate.
Yeah.
And it's when they talk about absent fathers, isn't it? And he says, I don't think another woman is what we need right now.
Yeah.
But it's that intimacy, and it's that, like, they are a married couple in that sense, aren't they? The way, you know, just talking in the bathroom while he's naked in the bath, etc. And he gets so jealous about Tyler's attention to Jared Leto's character. Yeah. That they are a bit like a, you know. They
are. And it does show that contrast between them and previous generations, doesn't it? Because he talks about his father, doesn't he? And he says about, oh, my dad left at such and such an age, you know, and he's got, you know, he's got like kids in every state or so. He says something like that. It's not that, but it's that kind of equivalency. And he says something like, oh, you know, he's setting up franchises. There's that kind of almost, you know, generational thing whereby, you know, that character, his father's character, if you like, was almost seen as, well, you know, well, that would have been okay, inverted commas, back then, for him to go and sleep with whoever he wanted, have kids with whoever he wanted. Whereas in this generation that they're kind of representing, Generation X, they don't have that. They don't feel that they can do that, etc. and so on. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the difference. That's the separation. And I think they say it the same way, in as much that, like you say, that family unit has shifted and has changed, and like you say, it then leads on to that kind of having another woman in our lives, I'm not sure, is what we need. And so, like you say, the homoeroticism and the generational kind of emasculation, if you like, is in one swoop. It's a really, really intimate scene, isn't it?
And it starts to bring in those kind of themes that we do see in it. So again, going back to the kind of the fight clubs, they're also, you know, I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but the, you know, one that was pointed out was the one where they are in the basement and they're all sweaty and they're semi-naked and the grappling and all the rest of it, and that is seen as one of those possible scenes that this is, it's violent, but it's human touch, which some of them might not feel in their daily lives and their normal routines, and I guess that's the purpose of the Fight Club in terms of, you know, it's confused, it's very confused, isn't it?
Yes,
this kind of setup of what they're getting out of it. But I guess that's the point as well, isn't it? That,
no, absolutely, and that's it. But again, that, like I say, it's that human touch, that male touch, you know, sort of, you know, that they do feel, whether that be kind of like a physical sense. It's certainly not a tender touch. It's not like something in like Spartacus, for example, or, you know, those kind of films where it was kind of seen as homoeroticism, but slightly different in terms of it was kind of like as a gentle touch. This is physical kind of brutality, but nevertheless it's there and it exists. Like you say, you don't know whether to believe it or not, but you know, it is
an
there.
Argument that's
yeah,
there,
yeah.
Isn't it?
And you know, trends, you've got to think about that as well, haven't you? The 1990s kind of bore out, you know, WWE, for example, wrestling.
It did, didn't it? Yeah.
Again, it's, you know, there's a lot of choreography involved in that, and again, without wanting to sort of, you know, I suppose destroy anyone else's, you know, passion about that particular sport, it certainly has. You can identify homoeroticism involved within it, doesn't it?
Like costumes and
in
all
a big
sorts.
way. Yeah, there you go. Spandex was invented for this reason. But you know, that is in place, and people say about boxing as well. You know, it's gladiatorial. It's kind of, you know, again, it's in a position where, you know, men are enjoying seeing other men interacting in a physical way.
Yeah.
Or whatever level you take that to.
On whatever level or
Yep.
kind of enjoyment that
Kind of
is.
enjoy that is, yeah.
Yeah. So it is definitely a complex film.
Most definitely.
I think, have we got anything more for gender identity?
I don't think so. I think there's quite a few things covered there because it's supported by the handouts and things that we give out anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, on to consumerism for our next one later on.
All right.
Okay, thank you.